Growing up, Saturday morning meant swimming lessons. And if you went through swimming lessons without any complaining about how cold the water was, Mom would always take us to Emily's Bakery to get a treat. It wasn't until middle school that I realized that they had all kinds of things on the other side of the donut case. So let's take a look at what ingredients we can find at our local bakery to spice up your own recipes at home. If your house is like our house, when it comes to taking that loaf of bread out of the drawer, everybody fights to not get that last piece. It's kind of become known as the bread butt at our house. The technical term for it is the bread heel, or the heel of the loaf. So today I'm going to show you how to make breadcrumbs with all those pieces that nobody wants to put in the toaster. So we're going to start by taking the ends of some of our bread loaves. They're a little dried out because they've been in the bag for a little while. And I'm going to take and I'm going to butter them, but I'm going to use unsalted butter. If you have salted butter, then you're going to end up altering the flavor in your recipe. So we're going to get a little bit of unsalted butter, and then I'm just going to come across and I'm going to put a pretty healthy dose of butter onto each of those pieces. By doing that, it'll give it a little bit of flavor, but it's not going to be a flavor that's going to alter your recipe. So now it's up to you. You can decide, do you want these to be a plain breadcrumb, and you can leave it just with the butter on here, or if you want to, you can add some other herbs or seasonings to it. If you're going to add it to more of an Italian dish, you can just grab a jar of that mystery Italian seasoning that nobody really knows what's in the jar. It just tastes like pizza / spaghetti / childhood memories of takeout food. Whatever you want to do to alter those flavors is totally fine. So now I'm going to move these over to my oven, and I'm going to put them under the broiler just for a few moments so they get a nice toasted color. So I have my bread nice and toasted from the oven. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it into my bread crumbs. So I'm going to take my first piece, and it's nice and crispy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bread knife and I'm going to slice it. And I'm going to take and put these smaller pieces into my food processor. And we're just going to take and pulse these until they're nice small pieces. The great thing about this way of making breadcrumbs is you can just basically pulse in your food processor whatever you need. So for our recipe today, I'm going to need a half a cup of breadcrumbs, and that only took me 2.5 pieces of bread, so the rest got thrown in a bag for another day. So let's get these breadcrumbs on the top of a perfect dish. The best thing about bread pudding is you can be a horrible baker and it will still turn out just fine. It's a little bit more cooking than baking. We're going to start with a whole loaf of bread from Emily's Bakery. You can use whatever kind of bread that you like. I grabbed their wheat bread. I think it adds a nice nuttiness to this bread pudding. But if you want to keep it more of a traditional bread pudding, you could do that just by grabbing a loaf of white bread, or if you have some brioche bread. And so then all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bread and I'm going to cube it. So I'm going to do that with my entire loaf so that I end up with about 8 cups of bread. So I have my entire loaf of bread all cubed up, and that puts me at about 8 cups of bread now. So it would be pretty boring if it was just bread pudding, in my opinion. So we're actually going to take and make this, like we said earlier, apple cider bread pudding. Now, there's all kinds of local apple ciders around Hastings, and I've got one of my favorites for this recipe, but just putting in the apple cider isn't quite enough of that apple cider flavor. So I'm going to take 2 apples, and I'm going to slice those up now. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to core my apple. All right, so now I'm going to take these pieces, and I'm going to cut this up. Now the nice thing is, what I like to do is just basically pop these into thirds, and then you can save time on the coring front, or the peeling front, by just taking and slicing off the edges, just like this. And now all I have to do is work around my core and cut it into nice little wedges, just like that. So I'm going to break up my 2 apples. So now we have our apples all chopped up nice and finely, and to that we are going to add a half a cup of raisins. Now you can go with the regular old purple raisins, or you can go with the golden raisins, and those are my favorite, so that's what I'm going to use in this recipe. And now we need to figure out how we're going to turn this into a pudding. So let's get started with that. So I'm going to start with another big bowl, and I'm going to start by adding 4 eggs. All right, so I'm breaking up my yolks, and now I'm going to whisk together all of my eggs. And then to that, I'm going to add 3 cups of milk, 1 cup of apple cider. And now with all of these liquids, I'm going to add in 1 cup of brown sugar. Whoa. I'm going to break that blob apart. And when I can't hear all those sugar crystals any longer being broken apart, now I can whisk it all together. All right, so we've got our brown sugar all whisked in. So now we're going to add our different spices to it. And the spices that we add to this are really going to enhance that whole apple cider feel. So I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1 teaspoon of allspice. Yummy. And then 1 teaspoon of cardamom. Now this one's a little bit harder to find, and it is a little bit more on the expensive side for spices in the grocery store. But without it, it just doesn't taste the same. So I make sure that I spend a little extra on this one. 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And now we're gonna stir all this together, and it's gonna start kind of smelling like an apple pie in your kitchen. And now we're going to combine our bread and our apples and our raisins with our pudding. So all I need to do is slowly pour this over the top. So I'm going to take my rubber scraper, and now I'm just going to keep folding all my pieces together. Alrighty, so I'm going to give this one final toss. I have a 9x13 baking dish ready to go into the oven, and I already have it sprayed with cooking spray. So now I'm going to transfer this into my pan. And I'm just going to even it out nicely. So now we're going to slide this into a 350-degree oven for 50 minutes, and then we'll check and see if it's done. So our apple cider bread pudding is out of the oven, and before you even think about serving it, you need to let it sit for 15 minutes. The easiest way to check your bread pudding before you take it out of the oven is to do a toothpick check in the bread and see if it comes out goopy, and if it looks clear there, then do a double check in your apple to make sure that those are cooked all the way through. And mine is, so I am good to go. Growing up, I thought the only way that you could get mac and cheese was from a blue box, and I could not stand it. So this grown-up twist on mac and cheese is one that I can definitely appreciate, and I'm sure you will too. B3 mac and cheese. It's got 3 B's: breadcrumbs, like we already made, bacon, and beer. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take 6 slices of bacon, and we are going to cook them and crumble them. Now, I do not like cooking the bacon and then crumbling it. I actually get it up and going by crumbling it beforehand. So I'm going to pre-crumble my bacon, and in order to do that, I'm just going to leave all the 6 pieces together, and I'm just going to come through with my kitchen shears, and I'm going to cut them up into about 1/2 inch wide long pieces. And by doing that, then when they cook down, the fat will render out of the bacon, and it will be pre-crumbled for me. And now, all I need to do is transfer my bacon over to my skillet. And what I like to do is break it apart a little bit by hand first. And then once it starts cooking, then I can use, it already smells good. Then what I'm going to do is as it starts cooking, I'll break it apart a little bit more with my spatula. So we'll start this up and we'll start cooking up our bacon. So I have my bacon all cooked down and I've transferred it over to a bowl that I lined with a paper towel so I can get some of that extra bacon grease out of the bacon so it doesn't disrupt my mac and cheese, because you don't want greasy mac and cheese. So we'll set that to the side for right now, and we're gonna start working on our cheese sauce. So in order to get that going, we're gonna start with 3 tablespoons of butter, and I'm gonna put that into my pot. And I'm going to start by melting that butter. And now I'm going to add to it 3 tablespoons of flour. And right away, you're gonna smell that flour starting to toast. And this is when you have to work quickly, because if you don't, what starts to happen is your butter gets lumpy and clumpy, and that's gonna disrupt the taste. And I'm gonna just stir it occasionally. I want it to cook for about 2 minutes. So while it cooks and starts to turn a nice caramel brown color, I'm gonna move this out of the way, and I'm going to start getting one of my cheeses ready. So with this mac and cheese, it has just a regular sharp cheddar, and then you want to take a trip down to that fancy cheese counter, and you want to get a block of nice sharp cheddar cheese. If you did the whole mac and cheese with this really sharp cheddar cheese, it would be overwhelming. So this recipe calls for 2.5 cups of cheese. So I'm going to do 2 cups of just regular old run-of-the-mill sharp cheddar cheese and 1/2 cup of our fancied sharp cheddar cheese. And when you're using your grater, you have a couple choices depending on how fancy your grater is. You want to go with the larger slices. The reason I'm going with my larger slices is the sharp cheddar cheese that I bought in the store is already pre-sliced. So if I go and take a peek, I want them to be roughly the same size so that I have the similar melting points. So let's do a spot check and see how much cheese I went overboard. That means I'm going to get a cheese snack, because I want just about 1/2 cup of cheese. So I can set that to the side to wait. And I'm going to take my extra plate, move my cheese over onto my extra plate. And now I'm going to get ready one of my herbs that's going to go into my cheese sauce. This cheese sauce has fresh thyme in it. So it takes a little bit of work to get your thyme ready. That takes some time for thyme. Okay, moving on. So if you've never worked with thyme before, it comes on these little sticks. You don't want to eat the sticks. The sticks are blech. So what you do is you put your finger on it and you're just going to pull backwards, and you're going to break off all these little thyme leaves. And as you pull, you'll see that you start to get more and more off. And I want to keep going until I have a teaspoon of my thyme leaves. So now that my roux has been cooking, it's gotten to be a more gold color. I'm going to add 2 cups of milk. And I'm going to stir to combine this. And so now I can see they're nice and incorporated. So I'm going to add now my beer, and this is 3/4 of a cup, and I want it to be a nice dark beer. And now we're going to stir this together. So what I've done is I've let these flavors meld together for a minute or 2, and that gave me some time to clean up some pieces here and there. And now I'm going to add my salt. I'm going to add a pinch of pepper. And I'm going to add my 2 cheeses. So like I said, I have 2 cups of shredded cheddar, and then 1/2 cup of my fancy cheddar cheese. Anytime you can take a trip to the cheese case is a good day. And now what I want to do is have this on medium-high heat, and I want to keep stirring this until I get to the point where my cheese is all melted and joined up with my milk and beer and butter and flour mixture. So all my cheese is now melted into my sauce, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove it from the heat, and you can just set it on your counter for right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1/2 of my cooked bacon. I'm going to sprinkle that on the top. And I'm going to take 1/2 of my thyme. 1/2 of my thyme. And I'm going to stir and combine these. And what I want to do is I want to let this slowly cool down just ever so much while I work on cooking my noodles. So we're gonna clear some things out of the way and get our noodles ready to cook. My cheese sauce is doing a great job staying warm over here, and now I'm going to make my macaroni for my macaroni and cheese. So I have my pot over here, and to that boiling pot, I'm going to add 8 ounces of elbow macaroni. So we're gonna drop that in there. When I do this, I want to make sure that I am using the small elbow macaroni. If I use the big one, it's going to have a tougher time getting the cheese sauce into the actual elbow macaroni. So when I cook this, I want this to go to al dente about 6 or 7 minutes depending on your pot. So we'll get that going and we'll see what it looks like in 6/7 minutes. With 4 pans on the counter, this is going to be delicious, you can tell. So we've got our cheese sauce still sitting there waiting for its turn. We've got our noodles cooked to al dente, and now we're gonna work on our breadcrumb chopping because remember, we've got 3 B's here: beer, bacon, and breadcrumbs. So I'm going to start by taking my butter, 1 tablespoon's worth, and I'm gonna put it in my pan and I'm going to melt it. Now while that's happening, I can start consolidating some other things. So I'm gonna start actually by adding my cheese sauce to my cooked noodles. And I'm gonna get all those delicious bits out of the pan. And now I'm gonna stir to combine my cheese sauce with my noodles. I'm gonna add my breadcrumbs and my thyme and what's left of my bacon. And I'm going to stir this all together, and I'm going to work on toasting this while I move over my mac and cheese and what I've got so far. I'm going to dumper that one. And now that I'm focused just on one thing, I'm going to bring this back over and work on toasting these up. And remember, these are those Emily's Bakery breadcrumbs, so these are going to be delicious on top of my mac and cheese. You know that your breadcrumbs are nice and toasty when it smells like that fresh out of the toaster smell when you're making your breakfast quickly in the morning. So I'm going to stop this, stir it just a little bit more, and now I'm going to work on spreading this over the top of my mac and cheese. Now, to keep this safe and making sure it's not boiling over in my oven, I'm going to take out a really oversized cookie tray. I'm going to transfer this right to here in the middle, and I'm going to load it into a 350-degree oven for 20 to 25 minutes. I'll know I'm ready to take it out of the oven when it's nice and bubbly. So we'll check on it in just a little bit. So our mac and cheese just came out of the oven, and we're going to do one little boop to make it even better before we dish it up and put it on the table. So every family has their favorite way they like to treat their steaks or their pork chops or any delicious meat that they grill. And our family always uses the same rub recipe. So this mac and cheese tastes even better if you just go on and sprinkle just the tiniest bit of barbecue seasoning on the top. It's just that last little salty kick that surprises people when they take that bite. And then our mac and cheese is donezo funzo. So we might only have 2 pans on our table, but remember, we made 3 recipes today. We started with our homemade breadcrumbs made from Emily's Bakery bread, and that was our delicious topping for our B3 mac and cheese. And then we've got our dessert, which is our delicious apple cider bread pudding. Now, I'm a bit of a sweet tooth, so I say we dig right in and get our first scoop of our bread pudding. It's set up nicely. And so now let's take a nice scoop, get a little more appley business going on. And I think we're ready for a tasty treat. So remember, the apron's optional, but the flavor isn't. B3 mac and cheese, take 4.